Hi, I hope you enjoyed this demo. I did it for an art group recently, and it is on how I abstract landscape using mark making, paint, and collage. So these are some photos that I took, and you will have had them sent to you too. I sent a selection. These two go together. They're driving on the road, that we take to get here into the mountains. And there was a huge burn a couple of years ago. I don't know whether you heard about the fires in BC, but this is the dry interior of British Columbia. So we've had some pretty dry summers. And it's sad to go through these areas, but I have to say, as an artist, I was kind of fascinated by them because this is mark making, right? This is all dead standing burnt wood, mostly pines. But I just thought, wow, that's actually really beautiful. So I determined I was going to do a piece based on this. So actually, I haven't done a prep yet for this. So this is like going to be new for me and you, although I've prepped some papers for it. So, all kinds of mark making here, and you can use brushes or other tools too. And this is also on the same road. And I love the mark making of the fences. And then these are the irrigation lines, which are both of our visual languages we were just using in our abstract: linear, and then the circles of the irrigation circles that are attached to these lines. I just love them. So I might be able to integrate that into the image. The paper mounted here, ready to go. Again, this is 140-pound watercolor paper, gessoed on both sides. Use this one here. I'm going to drop the horizon down here because I'm going to lay down with just raw paint the different layers. And then we'll see where we go. I'm going to make some collage papers, but I have some collage papers already made. So I'm going to show you how I do this technique of using tissue paper and collaging it on so that, it kind of sits there and what's on the paper sits on the surface. We'll see. Okay, so my palette, I am going to use that Payne's Gray Ochre palette. So here's yellow ochre, titanium white, Payne's Gray to start. And then I have some glazing colors, kind of earth tones that I might eventually bring in there, like the burnt umber FW ink. Oh, I thought that was antelope brown. Oh, but that would work. And nickel azo gold or transparent red oxide. We'll see if we need those or not. So the first thing I'm going to do is mix a color for the sky. Now this one doesn't have sky, but that one's got a sort of purpley, like the way you get a kind of purpley sky sometimes in the winter. And I like to push the grays into a bit of purple if I'm using warm tones like yellow ochres, because then you get the yellow purple dynamic. So get some burnt umber. So there's a gray made with the Payne's Gray. So just need to grab a couple of other colors. So I'll make a little bit of purple over here from cobalt blue and primary magenta. I mean, it's not a real neutral gray because Payne's Gray does have a little bit of blue in it, but just want to amend that a little. So add a little purple to it. There we go. Now, what I want to do here, because I'm going to put it directly onto my paper in kind of blobs and then pull it over. So I really want to have it very well mixed. So I'll use my palette knife to really mix it. And I'm just gonna put it here. So this is heavy body paint. In the spatula. And I like pulling this over because you get a little bit of transparency there. So there's my sky. And my plan is to, build these other layers. I'm going to use white, obviously, for the background because of the snow background. And then collage on some pieces. So while this is drying, I'm going to show you how I make the collage pieces. Okay. So here's some of my papers I've already made. I made these the other day. Just using, that's the transfer technique. The monoprinting technique right onto tissue paper. So this is just, cheap dollar store paper. This is creating some marks with, I think I used a fine brush. Here's some more transferring. No, that's with a brush. There's transferring and brush work on there. So I've got all these papers kind of ready to go. This is just right off my palette. This was made with twigs. And I'm going to make a few of these for you too. So that's again a transferring. This one was created with a piece of meat packing foam. And then I love this. I love just something that we usually throw away, using it for something interesting. So that is, again, our visual language is going to be a lot of kind of very linear, a lot of linear, different kinds of linear expressions. So this is with a brush that's actually a craft brush with a lot of different separated bristles. So these are the papers I've made. And it's another one. So I'll make a few just to show you how I did those, okay? Keep that handy. Here's my tissue paper. Got a stack of tissue paper. I thought this might be fun too, just because this is dressmaker pattern, just as another color of paper to put on. Now the thing is, if you're going to collage with stuff that you forage around for, just remember that it may not be light fast. So for instance, there's beautiful colors of tissue paper, but if you collage them into works, unless they're works that are protected, like in a journal or something like that, if they're exposed to light, they're going to fade over time. So one of the things you can do with just this plain tissue paper is tint it yourself with your archival paints, your artist quality paints or inks or whatever, and use those. Here's one that I used some print on. These ones I may use that just plain white one, but this one is not part of our visual language in this image, so I'm putting it aside. All right, so I used just wax paper for my palette. Now I really like to use India ink, but the thing about India ink is that it takes a long time to dry. And so, it'll lift and move for a long time after you work with it. But it does have a really It's so nice and fluid and it's so dark. So I really love to draw with twigs. So this is a twig that I can't even remember where I got it. And I like it because it's all kind of frayed and split on the end. And so it makes really great and variable line, right? Like one of the things that I think, find difficult to do is to create the irregularity that we see in nature. Often when we do repeating forms in a painting, we'll just make the same mark over and over and over again. Like think about, for instance, trying to draw a forest and how often we just end up drawing something that looks like a bunch of Christmas trees, all the same. It's very hard for us to do really irregular things. So I like to use tools that make us, that give us that kind of irregularity. So I'm going to set this aside. I won't be able to use it on my piece because it won't be right. But that's why I made the papers already ready to go. All right, let's look at some other mark makers. Let's look at this rope brush that I made. I love this. So I think that's just fabulous. So that's just a twig with an old piece of rope that I found on my island. There's a lot of boats, so there's a lot of rope around on my island. Again, I'll set this aside. This is kind of great. This is just what leaked through. So here's like kind of a monoprint right off the tissue, right off the wax paper palette. Got a little something, not much. So we'll just set this aside before it gets into ink everywhere. Here's the craft brush that I made one of the papers from. And then I really love these long rigger brushes. They're so great for getting kind of the gesture of branches and trees. They've got these nice long bristles. And you use them kind of with a calligraphic stroke. And I have a couple of different weights of them. Let's try this one. Takes a little practice to use these, but you have to really just use them right from your shoulder. And then, you can press down on them and release them to get different weights of line. And let's try this styrofoam thing that I made. I'm gonna actually make some finer lines in there too. So I think you can see how I made it. It's just simple, 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 simple. I put the India ink away. And a brayer. So let's get our palette here. A little bit of Payne's gray, some yellow ochre, and show you what a beautiful mix this makes. I'm really mixing it consistently. So that could have had a bit more paint on it. Just maybe brush some paint on it. That would work for far off trees, but let's get it a little bit more, a little bit heavier. So if you don't have a brayer, you can use a brush, of course. Brayers can be a bit pricey, but they are really handy to have. I'll just run the brayer over to get a really good contact there. So that's better. You can see it's a bit fragile is the only thing with the tissue, but so you do have to be a little bit careful with it. Then when you use a brayer, just remember to clean it off clean it off. So that's the kind of thing that I was doing to create these. Let's do one more just with a brighter color, like go back to our ochre. Maybe I'll add a little bit of quinacridone Nicolazo gold, which is a really beautiful color. This is one of my favorite glazing colors. Quinacridone gold. All the quinacridones are really, really transparent. It's great for glazing. But they're very transparent, so that if you want to get some body, adding them to something like an ochre or a white will give them a bit of covering power. So I'm going to go back to this brush. And there's a lot of kind of little shrubby forms in that landscape. Some of it is a bit more kind of straw colored. But anyway, I just wanted to show you how I do it. And then one can always do something like this. I love drawing into these. Sorry, slid it out of your view. That's just the palette, right? And I'm just going to draw into it and then transfer it. And you get these kind of wonderful textured pieces of paper that you can use for collage. Yeah, so let's go back to our image. Pretty dry. Okay, I'm going to now mix the white that I want for the far off hills. I go through a lot of wax paper in my practice. I love wax paper. It's what I use usually in my studio, and then if I want to keep the paint wet, I'll just put it on rather than spending a lot on expensive palette paper, I'll use wax paper or parchment paper and then just put it in a wet palette, or just have it lying over some damp paper towel while I work. So I'm going to add just a little touch of burnt umber ink to this white, because it's not bright white. So burnt umber is a little bit warm. It's maybe a little too warm, but I'll add a little bit of Payne's gray to that, I think, just to gray it down a little. And I'm sure I'm going to have to add more white to it too. I love these kind of putty colors you get from these earth tones, you know, the ochres and siennas and umbers. Complex neutrals. And they're really important in paintings where you're using a lot of color too, because neutrals are kind of hold the color for us, and keep us from being overwhelmed by pure hues. That's a really nice color, but I think we need a little bit more of a lighter white. Yeah, that's good. Now remember, these are just the first layers, and I'm not thinking at all about all the steps that I'm going to go through to get to my endpoint, because I know I'm going to find some surprises along the way, things I'm not expecting. I'm going to pull that up a little bit onto that blue because I don't think I want quite that much sky. And I like leaving a little bit of kind of ragged edge. I can always go up and clean that up later. Well, that's my layer number 2. Might be able to even do a little bit of mark making on there now. So these would be, we're into landscape now, so that has its own rules. Even if you're abstracting, unless you want to really just move into almost pure abstraction, there are rules in landscaping, and one of them is scale. So as you go farther away, objects get smaller. So that's what I'm doing with the scale here. Just making, I know I'm going to be using this kind of cross hatching technique. So I'm making sure I'm not doing them too big, because these are the very far off trees. And just going to dry that because I want to put another layer in. So now I'll make a white that's a bit warmer. I'm going to go back to our image here. So kind of working in this layer and then this layer. Then I'll bring, another layer that will be the foreground into it. Okay. So bear with me. Maybe I'll add a little bit of yellow ochre to this to warm it up. So one of the other rules about landscape is that the layers closer to us are warmer. So if I want the viewer to see this as layers, my painting is going to try to be telling a story of layers of landscape, then I really need to follow those rules about atmospheric perspective so that the layers closest to us are warmer. Now, there's a lot of ragged edges here. I'm not too concerned about following my photograph exactly. And then finally, I'll make another layer that's maybe even brighter white. So no Payne's gray in it at all. So just to go over again, that atmospheric perspective, as colors move away from us in our layers of land, they get cooler and also less intense, less saturated. So that sounds easy, but if any of you are landscape painters, you'll know it's not as easy as it sounds. It can be really a real challenge to find, for instance, with yellows, say we're working with yellows. You can have yellows in the foreground and the background, but the background yellows have to be either greener, in other words, not warm, like an orangey yellow, or they have to be less saturated. So there's the two things to work with. And then, as I said before, there's the scale too. So I'm just creating a little bit of mess here, bringing some of this white up, working with my palette knife. I might do a little bit of scoring as I can. The other thing that's really helpful to keep in mind as you work through landscapes is the idea of layers of ground. So right now I've made some very indistinct layers of ground. But as you work through, as you work through the landscape, you really do have to separate the layers of ground, and remember that everything in a landscape is attached to a layer of ground other than the sky, of course. But every tree, every piece of grass, every structure is attached to a layer of ground. So if you can recognize that as you're working through, and then be sure to separate those layers of ground, your paintings, your landscape paintings will be much more successful, because you'll make sure that the atmospheric perspective will agree with support your drawing, and things will not look like they're kind of floating on a flat surface. They all of a sudden will click into place. And let's look at our papers. These are the ones I just made. That one might come in handy. So I'm going to start with these, because these kind of hatched language is, I'm going to start kind of at the back and move forward. So we have the hatches of the trees up on the slopes here. I might go in also, but work with some of my mark making tools, like the charcoal. And I'm just going to put that there again for us to look at, to remind us what we're doing. Okay, so remember, I'm getting bigger as I come forward. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to draw in some layers of ground for myself. So there's a layer of ground. Here's a layer of ground. These two aren't really pulled apart right here, but I will. So I'm just kind of building in layers of ground, if you can see that. There's a layer. Maybe there's one up here. Yeah, so now I have things to ground stuff on, okay? So I'm going to ground these big trees. So let's start with some of our papers here. Now, the thing about tissue paper in general has a grain, and it'll tear in some ways really easily. Here's the grain. See how easily that tears? When we try to tear this way, it tears unevenly. So you may want to use scissors. I like just tearing it whichever way it goes. Again, if we get to put a tool in our hands that we can be too precise with, like a brush or scissors, and we get precise. So I'm just making some strips of these. And these are kind of large scale. These ones are smaller. I'm going to do some overlapping too. So I'm going to use matte medium to glue this collage stuff on. I'm just going to put it on my wax paper, so I have a nice pebble of it. That's golden matte medium. You can use gloss medium if you like. I just find everything gets a lot stickier with gloss medium. I'm just cleaning off a brush so it's really, really clean. Okay. So now I have my layers of ground, right? So I'm confident about where I'm going to put these. Now the charcoal pencil is pulling a little bit. If I really wanted to, I could have fixed that. But I kind of like the smeariness of it, so I'm just going to leave it there. The main thing with collaging, especially with this, well, especially with heavier papers, but even with this tissue paper, is that you really need to get it consistent underneath and on top. And we don't want wrinkles in the paper. So you can see how the paper kind of disappears. And what we're left with is the stuff that's floating on the top, the marks we've made. And I'm going to put some more in too, because one of the things that happens here is it's as if the marks are overlapping each other and creating denser places. So let's get another one. Just making sure that there's really an even coating of medium there. You can see I'm kind of moving from the center out. So to me, like this is just, I could just put all these marks down with my brush, but I just really like, as I said before, the kind of unexpected, the impossibility of planning, you know, that you get with this technique. We're going to put some really big ones in here. Maybe attached to another layer of ground. And so here I'm kind of diverging from the picture a little bit, but I had these larger scale ones, so I thought it would be fun to get them in. So the same but different, right? Just what we were talking about with the abstract work. It's the same but different. It's the same language, but it's bigger marks. Okay, and here they are smaller. We'll rip it a little bit thinner. Let's follow this layer of ground right here with these really little ones. Still want to build these up because I think it's interesting when they start to overlap and you can see the different layers showing, poking through each other, you know, like the transparency of the tissue paper allows us to see what's lying underneath. So I'm just going to dry this and come back and put some more on. So I think this is really fun. Let's go to some of our other papers. I could definitely build some more up here with Lee, but let's move to some of our other papers. Look at the picture again too. So we have these nice bright bits there. And again, I'm willing to stray from the image if some really interesting things start happening here. I think maybe I'll put some of this warm. I'm ripping against the grain here. That's not ideal. So I'm kind of thinking this might sort of be this area here. Let's give it a try. So it's creating a new layer of ground. Now, if I wanted to, I could trim that. So let's trim this as if it's sitting on a layer of ground. Something like that. And again, we'll just get myself a little bit more matte medium, and we can interact with that. Like one of the things with the collage papers is that's not the final look of this. You know, we're going to draw over it, maybe do some glazing. But by doing this, we also have created, we're playing with our language again. So you can see here's the line, light on dark. Here's the line, dark on light. So doesn't the eye like that? Let's get some warmer stuff too. So this was created by just transferring the paint, that kind of monoprint technique. Gonna rip it up. Find some places. Now this is quite large. So if we want it to be, if we want it to be broken up, we're going to need to rip it up sideways as well. So these are these kinds of the grasses and things that are in the foreground. And I just love the way that these collage pieces kind of get that, you know, they get that kind of scrubby, messy. And I've drawn into the paint before I transferred it. So I've created this kind of the linear marks. So the other thing with collages, you can kind of set them up the way you want. And it feels to me like we might also want some of these warmer papers, the warmer colors too. Maybe these ones should go more in the foreground because they're warmer, right? And they'll read more forward than the brown. So something like that. Maybe I'll put a little bit of this one over here too. So if you can see what's going on there. And we'll get some of these really warm ones in here. And then we'll put some of the darker, cooler browns in behind here. A little bit of overlap. And remember, I can always go in and interact with these, with paint as well, paint and other mark making. Just put one more piece in there. We'll move on to some of the other sections. So I'll just let you have a look at that, how that's evolving the whole thing. So you can see how the tissue paper is so nice because it just kind of disappears and creates these edges that are actually really hard to get with the brush. All right. I really like those marks of the irrigation lines. So I'm going to grab my pencil and draw some of those in as if they're sitting in a field right here. So if I go back to those, so I'm just going to kind of play with them. And again, working with scale. This one's far away. There's also some fences. I'm going to just put in some lines that might be fence lines. Trying not to be too regular. And these irrigation things are really interesting because depending on what angle you're looking at them, they start to compress. So I'm paying attention to that, even though, you know, this isn't, it's a bit of an abstracted landscape, but I'm not breaking all the rules of perspective. It's not perfect, but I'm moving a little fast. So those are just fun, I think. Put a line in through there. Okay, I'm going to put some more, here, let's just see those a little closer. So they're kind of the ideas of the irrigation lines, kind of messed up a little bit. I'm going to put some more things in here. I really like this image, how there's these other lines that come up and kind of lay over this empty field, which I've now filled with other things. But I think I could maybe just superimpose those here. So let me get a different kind of mark maker. A couple of different things. Okay, I'll go to my twig and my India ink. And it's very difficult to control, which is the beauty of it. But I still want to see some of the white in behind. And I can interact again, you know, with once it's dry, once it's very dry. The problem, as I said, with India ink is that it takes a while to dry. I've just got the end of my brush here. I'm just kind of carving into that. I really like using the end of my brush. I often do that. Okay, I want to put a little bit more warmth in the foreground here because I actually have another temperature of these marks that are even warmer. These ones here. So let's just get a few of those in. What I would really like is that kind of straw color that's in the painting. That's a beautiful, beautiful color. But I'm going to, I'm not going to mix that right now. I'll just work with what I've got at hand. I'm going to get some of this pure white too to add to a couple of places. All right, let's add some of these really bright ones. I'll just get one more temperature. Well, the paper starts to get really wet because it's got a lot of layers of collage on it, and then it starts to buckle. But as soon as it dries, it'll flatten out. All right, I'm going to now just sort of interact with a little bit of paint too. I'm awash with the collage papers. This was one I made this morning that I really quite like. It might be nice as a layer too. Before I head over to the paint, that's kind of nice. So that creates almost another layer of ground there. Or maybe there, yeah, maybe See how the Indian ink is moving around there? That's kind of created a really nice textured area. All right, here's my palette. I'm going to go back to the original palette I was working with. White. I really liked the burnt umber and white mix that I made earlier. That might be nice in one of these layers of ground. So I'll just mix that. To get a really warm white. All right, so now I can go in and kind of start to interact here with what I've laid down there. And, you know, I can just come in around those pieces of collage, or I could take a finer brush, like my rigger, and, you know, interact with it. So what I like to do with collage is put it down and then interact with it. So otherwise it can seem a little disconnected to the rest of the painting. So come in, put some, thread some paint around. See that nice warm white is sitting closer. And it's handy to actually have a fluid white. Actually, this is a Liquitex. I just bought this. This is somewhere between hard body, heavy body, hard body, heavy body paint and fluid paint. It's called a soft body paint. So I'm really kind of enjoying that. So you can just add a little bit of fluidity to your mix. So here's these riggers are so good for making these kind of grass shapes, right? To make them look natural. A few more in here. And I could, you know, work with some more tones in these whites to you know, build a few more tones of these into this. Let's just get one that's a little browner. Here's a little puddle of burnt umber I had. Thinking about my layers of ground still. And I feel like I need some really bright white back in here because, again, I've sort of indicated that this is, with the drawing, that this is receding back, but this whole piece here is the same color. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. If you pay attention to making sure that your layers of ground are supporting your drawing. So the drawing's telling me this is moving back. So we need to start pulling these layers of ground apart. So I'm going to come in and just make a brighter white here, come in between the things I've laid down there. So this should pull this layer here forward. You should be seeing that. And I'm going to need to get a littler brush to get some detail in there. So now we're kind of interacting with the things we've put down there. These are very fun shapes. I really like these little irrigation things, but I've got to get in there and do a little bit of detail so that I'm supporting my drawing. Okay, so these two layers have now pulled apart. It feels like we need to create something here too. Maybe make it a little bit warm, not quite as warm as down here, but just sort of, so what I've done on my palette, here's the yellow, sort of, it's burnt umber and white that created this. So now I'm going to just add a little touch of it to the white to put in here. I think I need a smaller brush actually, because I want to get into those little spaces I created. So I've made it a little warmer so it sits a little closer. And it's just a very small difference, but it's important because our eye picks up these very, very small changes in value and temperature. So it's just a little bit of that burnt umber, hardly any, and white. I can't actually go down into those, that, to touch that ink because it's still wet. As I said, it takes a while. And when you're introducing opaques like this, you can go, you can go in and kind of reshape things too. Like I could change the profile of this rock. I can come in and work in between these negative spaces. There, so I've kind of pulled things apart now. These areas still need to be pulled apart. So I'm going to go back up here. And these two layers should be pulled apart too. I'm not going to work through those right now though, because I want to go up into this area here, including the sky, to finish this off. Okay, is I want to do the sky here because I think that I want to show you how we put that in with just the scraper tool, and now we can go back and work with the brush, with a large brush, so we can kind of carve that that horizon using Payne's gray, titanium white. I'm going to use just a little tiny bit of blue. There was blue and primary magenta in that mix, if you remember. So I'm going to mix it up. Not very much Payne's gray, so I want it to be lighter, just a tad of, just a little bit of cobalt blue. And I'll go back to the brush and start to actually, bite into that horizon. Just so we get a sharper skyline, a little bit more paint here. I'll actually put some of this down with the again with the palette knife. And leave a little bit of that gray showing through. And then again, just kind of with the brush coming in and working with that horizon. Trying to make a kind of an interesting skyline. So there now I've created a more interesting and kind of, I suppose you might say, realistic sky. And so then the remainder to be done is to go into these other layers of ground to pull them apart. So I'm just going to go and get go back to this mix of that I made for the sky, and just add a little bit more white to it. just working with the palette at hand that I've been working with. Tiny bit of the burnt umber, but just working back into my sky color. And, you know, start to paint in some of these negative spaces to really pull these layers of ground apart. And I can always do more mark making on top, but that kind of pulls that layer away now. And let's just do this one and then we'll wrap up there. So I'm going to go back to my mix, add a little bit more of that umber, just make it a little warmer, but maybe a little blue too. So it's not exactly the same color as down here. So I'm working with a really limited palette. And add a little bit of Payne's gray to that. So it's just ever so slightly different. Enough for the eye to see that it's sitting in a different plane. And I could use a finer brush, you know, if I really wanted to get into all these little fine negative spaces, but I'm trying to work kind of fast right now. So you can see how the layers are starting to pull apart now. I'll just do one more warmer one here with some gray. So it's really helping me that I drew my layers of ground in. And I can come in and obscure some of those lines if I want to with paint now, right? I don't have to leave them there. So there we are. Just lift it up so you can see some of the work we've done. And so as I go through this to finish it, I'll be doing a little bit more interacting with the collage pieces, especially with the hatching. But it really has to be very dry before I start to go in with the charcoal pencil or the fine felt pen, just to kind of create a bit more, to interact with the collage pieces that I've put down there. Because if you look at the image, there's a lot of sort of denser areas where the trees are really overlapping each other. So you don't get this kind of even distribution. You get sort of a denser collection of mark making. So that is how I use anything but the brush, or almost, and collage pieces to create interesting surfaces with landscape.